Have you ever felt like you've come back, but a part of you is stuck somewhere else? As if the body was here, but the soul was still lost in a land where everything hurt, where everything bled, even without a visible wound. I came back, but a part of me stayed there. My friend stayed there. And since then I have carried in my chest a war that no one sees. If you've ever lost someone and felt like you wouldn't be the same again, this story is for you. War has many ways of breaking us. Some are visible, wounds, scars, absences, but others are invisible. And perhaps these are the hardest to face, the ones no one notices, but which consume you silently. When I lost my friends on the battlefield, I didn't just lose comrades. I lost pieces of myself. I lost my faith, my sleep, my will to carry on. And perhaps deep down, you too know this kind of pain we try to hide, but which insists on returning when everything gets too quiet. The truth is, no one returns from war in one piece. And I'm not just talking about the war with guns and explosions. I'm talking about the internal war, the one we wage when we return home and realize nothing makes sense anymore, that hugs no longer fulfill us, that the days seem too long and the nights even worse. Stay with me until the end because what you'll discover now may surprise you. For a long time I was just a soldier trying to survive outside the battlefield, trying to appear normal, when inside everything was in ruins. Every familiar face reminded me of someone who wouldn't return. Every silence was a minefield of memories. Perhaps you know this feeling, of being surrounded by people, yet completely alone, of smiling so as not to scare anyone, even with my heart screaming inside. That's why today I want to share this story with you, not to talk about war, but to talk about something greater, the pain that destroys us, and the faith that can rebuild. Because in the midst of the darkness I found a light I hadn't expected, something that went beyond logic, beyond pain, beyond everything I believed. A new kind of brother, not in uniform, but in faith. A new mission, not on the battlefield, but within myself. And that's why you need to hear this, because maybe your war is different, maybe your pain has a different name, but deep down, the emptiness is the same, and there is a way through it. Have you ever felt this way too? Like no one understands what's really going on inside? Like you're living with invisible scars, waiting for someone to see without you needing to explain? So this story is yours too. Maybe today is the day you discover that even after losing everything, it's still possible to find something that no one can take away. Something that begins in silence and can change everything. And perhaps, along the way, you've also encountered your own battles. Maybe not with gunfire, but with losses, silences, disappointments, or nights when it seemed the world had forgotten you. If this topic resonates with you, if something here touched a nerve or sparked a memory, leave it in the comments. Share what you felt or simply say, I understand. Because sometimes all we need is to know we're not alone on this journey. Every comment here isn't just a rant, it's a beacon of light. It's a way to show those reading that empathy exists, that there's room for pain and also for healing. And when you like this video, when you subscribe, you're not just pressing a button, you're saying you want to continue this journey, that this conversation needs to reach more people, more weary hearts, more lives still searching for meaning after pain. This channel exists because of stories like this, and because of people like you, who decide to be a part of it. Your participation is what makes this message reach further. It's what transforms a simple video into a haven, a reunion, a respite in the midst of someone's internal war. So, if this touched you in any way, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and come walk with us. Because what comes next might be exactly what you needed to hear today. Before everything happened, I was just an ordinary guy. One of those people who grows up trying to get it right, wanting to do the right thing, seeking family approval, trying to be strong even when it hurt. I never saw myself as a hero. I never sought medals, nor did I want to carry a flag. I just wanted to protect the ones I loved. I lived with a kind of innocence that made me believe the world was more predictable, safer, more fair. And maybe that's when everything started to change. The moment I realized the world isn't driven by the same truths we hold dear. I had dreams, simple ones even. I thought about returning home, building a family, having a place to call my own, watching time pass without fear of loud noises or memories that return uninvited. And in the beginning, when I enlisted, I thought it all made sense, that there was honor in the fight, purpose in the uniform, security in command. But what no one talks about, or what few have the courage to face, is that there's a silent price to all of this. And sometimes the price isn't paid with blood, but with the soul. The first time I felt reality tighten around my chest was when I realized there was no going back. I was already there, and everything I knew began to dissolve. The routine, the faces, the sense of control. Suddenly I was surrounded by other guys, all with tense looks, all too quiet or laughing too loud to hide their fear. And even with the troops around me, I began to understand how loud loneliness can be. I began to see behind the scenes of a war no one talks about, the one that happens inside our minds. The physical training was tough, sure, but that wasn't what consumed me most. What really weighed on me was the silence of my thoughts, the way we begin to disconnect from who we were. The soldier gradually takes the place of the son, the brother, the friend. Identity is shaped by the environment, the urgency, the survival. And before you know it, that boy who only wanted to live in peace no longer recognizes himself in the mirror. It was as if my humanity was being left behind, one piece at a time. That's when homesickness began to become a constant presence. Not just for my parents, my friends, the smell of home, the hot coffee in the late afternoon, but for myself. I missed who I was before I learned to sleep with one eye open, before I started calling normal what should never have been. And when you start missing yourself, something inside you sets off an alarm, because you understand you're losing yourself. You just don't know how to get back. Amidst all this, something deeper was emerging. The realization that some truths I'd been taught might not be so solid after all. I found myself questioning right and wrong, fair and cruel, the value of life, the true meaning of courage. I began to see a hidden truth behind it all. The war that hurts most isn't the one that happens out there, but the one that forces you to kill parts of yourself just to stay standing. And as necessary as it seemed, it gnawed at me from within, like an open wound no one saw. I wondered many times if going home would be enough. If all it would take was to take off my uniform, hand over my weapon, and walk through the front door for everything to go back to normal. But the truth, and this is one of those things no one prepares you for, is that there's no reset button. War leaves its mark, and not just in the destroyed fields, but in the empty gaze, the hesitant touch, the memory that replays scenes you'd rather forget. The pain sets in without asking permission, and the transformation it brings about isn't always visible. This is the part almost no one tells you, the part that happens after the shooting stops, after the anthems play, after the soldier returns home and tries to sit on the couch as if it were the same as before. But it's not, because there's a loss that has no name, a feeling of having left something behind that may never be recovered. And deep down, what hurts the most isn't what was taken, but what was lost silently, slowly, between one mission and the next. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, because there's something that needs to be exposed, something that transforms this story of pain into a journey of discovery, and maybe that's what you're looking for right now, even without realizing it. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. That night, I heard the screams, and strange as it may seem, it was the following seconds that marked me forever, because after the roar, after the fear coursing through my chest, came silence. A silence so dense it felt like screaming. I remember exactly the moment the dust began to settle, and I realized something had changed, not just on the battlefield, but within me. What remained was not just the physical absence of my comrades, but a void so deep it echoed within, as if a hole had been torn in my soul. It's hard to explain the impact of losing someone who shared every second of fear, tension, and longing with you. We created unique bonds there, bonds that didn't require many words but were built with glances, small gestures, with the certainty that one would protect the other until the end. And when that other falls, something inside you collapses with it. You don't think of heroes, you don't think of glory. You just feel a kind of rupture, as if the world had brutally shown that it doesn't care about justice, promises, or plans. There, in that instant when I realized they wouldn't return, something froze inside me. And even though I still breathed, still walked, still followed orders, a part of me remained stuck at that exact point in time. The pain was silent, constant, insistent. It didn't arrive screaming. It simply settled in and spread through the corners of my mind, my dreams, my memory. It began to invade everything, from the way I slept to the way I smiled. Because yes, even laughter changes after a loss like this. It becomes a reminder that you were once someone lighter, more alive. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, Because there's something rarely discussed. Grief during war has a different nature. It has no time. It has no ceremony. It has no space for pause. We learn to swallow the pain, to carry on as if nothing had happened, because stopping would be dangerous, and to show emotion, even more so. So you pretend everything is under control, but inside, your entire system is breaking down. You begin to live in a constant state of alert, and this continuous tension shapes your mindset, your decisions, even your view of what truly matters. It's not just the loss of someone, it's the loss of a piece of your history, of a version of yourself that trusted, that hoped, that dreamed. After that, I looked around and saw everything through a different lens. The landscapes no longer had color, the sounds all seemed muffled, and the faces I had left seemed so fleeting. Because after you feel the pain of a sudden goodbye, you begin to doubt the permanence of everything. The world becomes a fragile place. People become memories before their time. And you start to protect yourself by distancing yourself even without wanting to. It's strange to say this, but at a certain point I had to force myself not to feel so much. Because if I left my heart open, the pain would paralyze me. So I created an emotional armor, a kind of involuntary coldness, as if disconnecting was the only way to continue. And this, over time, takes its toll. Because you stop suffering so much, yes, but you also stop connecting, trusting, living fully. You become functional but empty. And this is one of the hardest hidden truths I've had to face. Surviving doesn't mean being truly alive. What truly devastated me, however, wasn't just their absence. It was the fact that even after everything, the world outside continued. People continued. The days continued to dawn. And that left me trapped in a time that no longer existed. My body was here, but my soul, still there. It was as if I'd been transported to a parallel dimension, where everything was as before, except me. And trying to explain this to the people waiting for me at home was like speaking a language no one else understood. It was loneliness within the crowd. It was screaming on the inside and smiling on the outside. It was walking familiar streets but without recognizing yourself in them. These losses made me question everything. My purpose, my faith, my strength. They made me look to the sky with anger, and sometimes with hope. They made me realize that behind every returning soldier lies an untold story, a story made of invisible scars, of internal battles, of silent reconstructions. And perhaps the hardest part is this, having to return to live in a world that expects you to be the same, when everything inside you has already changed. Write it down. That makes sense to me. The hardest part wasn't the war itself. It was coming back. Returning to a world that felt the same but no longer suited me. The streets were all there. The sense of childhood still wafted through the air. Hugs were available. But I was no longer that boy who had left home full of honor and obedience. I had returned with a scarred mind, a weary heart, and a soul full of questions that no one else seemed able to answer. People hugged me, but no one saw the scars I carried inside. It's as if the city had frozen in time when I left, waiting for my return. But I didn't return whole. I was the same on paper, but completely different in essence. My favorite food no longer tasted good. Conversations felt empty. Familiar smiles caused me more pain than comfort, because they reminded me of a time when I could still truly feel. My mind, full of invisible warnings, transformed every noise into a threat. A gate slamming, a motorcycle revving, a crowd cheering. Everything was interpreted as danger. I was home, but my body still thought it was at war. My family tried. I know they tried. But there was a chasm between what I needed and what they could offer. They wanted to see me well. They wanted to celebrate my return. But how could I explain that the mere fact of being back already felt like a burden? How could I say that the guilt of having survived consumed me day after day? How could I open my mouth and reveal that the night frightened me, not because of the darkness, but because it brought back voices I thought I had left behind? This is where the hidden truth that few people know begins. Returning home is often more cruel than combat. Because in war, at least you know where the enemy is. On the way back, you are your own minefield. Every thought is a risky step. Every memory can make you explode inside. And the world, outside, carries on as if nothing had happened. People talk about football, politics, weekend plans, and there you are, standing there trying to appear interested, but with your soul completely disconnected from the reality around you. This is the behind-the-scenes war that no one shows. The silence after the noise. the absence after the presence, the attempt to relearn how to live when everything inside you is reprogrammed to survive. It's as if every daily gesture demands an effort no one understands. Taking a shower, leaving the house, talking to someone. Everything becomes a mission. You begin to understand that what was wounded wasn't just your body, nor just your memory, but your ability to feel safe in the world. And that's when I began to notice a shift within me. Not an immediate transformation, like in stories that end with quick redemption. It was more subtle, slower, more painful. It was as if I were walking inside myself, feeling my way through walls I didn't even know existed. And the further I got from the physical battlefield, the deeper I delved into the unknown territory of my own mind. I began to wonder if it was still possible to feel something beyond the pain again. If there was still time to find some kind of meaning, even in the midst of so much confusion. This internal journey forced me to question my decisions, my mindset, my worldview. I began to distrust the image of strength I'd been taught to maintain. I realized that carrying everything alone wasn't a sign of courage but of accumulated exhaustion. And it was in that moment of rupture, in that silent space between who I was and who I was trying to become, that something new began to emerge. A small opening. A space to try something else. Something beyond control, beyond pride, beyond pain. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because this opening, however small, led me to unexpected encounters. People who didn't demand explanations from me. Places where silence was welcome. Words so simple they penetrated my defenses. I began to understand that simply surviving wasn't enough. I needed to relearn how to exist. And this process, however intimate and confusing, had more to do with presence than logic. It had more to do with finding a kind of faith that didn't come from pre-written speeches, but from truly living with pain. Write it down. I'm trying to get back to. Over time, what scared me most wasn't what I remembered, but what I could no longer feel. My emotions became confused. It was as if everything inside me was numb, as if my body had returned, but my heart was on standby. It wasn't just longing, it was guilt, it was heaviness, it was fear of sleeping and seeing it all again. Because when night came, it didn't bring rest. It brought the faces, the voices, the choices I made and the ones I couldn't make. My mind created traps, and my body reacted as if I were still there. And deep down, I was. I tried to carry on, to hide it, to smile, but it was like acting in a play that no longer made sense. I withdrew from conversations, avoided questions, and lost interest in everything that once brought me joy. People asked how I was, and I responded with stock phrases. I'm fine. Just tired. I need some time. But the truth is, I couldn't name what I was feeling. It was a mixture of anguish and apathy, a silence that screamed, a fear of going mad, even though I was seemingly in control. Isolation didn't arrive suddenly. It built slowly between one memory and the next, between a late night's sleep and a cold coffee in the morning. And the more I tried to explain, the less I was understood. Because there are wounds that don't show up on scans, that don't bleed visibly, that can't be touched by human hands, and that made me doubt myself. Was I overreacting? Did I need to be stronger? Did everyone expect me to simply get over it? These questions haunted me, and I couldn't find a safe space to answer them. I found myself building walls, invisible but high, not out of malice, not out of pride, but for protection, because exposing myself was risky. Showing what I felt meant admitting I was lost. And honestly, not everyone knows how to deal with this truth. Most prefer an it's okay to facing an I'm broken inside. And so little by little I began distancing myself from everything, from everyone, even from myself. There were days when life felt like an echo. I woke up, did what needed to be done, fulfilled my commitments, but it was as if I were watching my own existence from the outside, an observer of my own story. Nothing seemed real, and the worst part was this feeling of being surrounded by people, yet completely alone, as if I were speaking a language no one else spoke, as if my thoughts were foreign in my own land. This was the war no one saw, and it was constant, silent, and exhausting. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because isolation wasn't just a consequence of grief. It was also a reflection of guilt, that survivor's guilt, that no one understands until they feel it. That unbearable question, why did I come back and they didn't? Why was I spared? Did I deserve it? Was I a coward at some point? And even though I knew, rationally, that the guilt was pointless, the feeling clung to me tightly. It made me retreat. made me hide, because the world went on, but inside me, everything had stopped there, at the moment of loss, at the moment of the scream, at the moment of silence. This guilt shaped my identity. I stopped being just a former soldier. I became a man in constant internal judgment. Every time I smiled, a voice inside me asked, "Do you have the right to be happy?" Every time something went right, it whispered, "They're not here to see this." And little by little, I began to accept that narrative as truth. I began to live in fear of living, as if being happy were a form of betrayal. This kind of pain has a profound impact. It affects not only how you feel, but also what you believe about yourself. And therein lies one of the most dangerous hidden truths. You begin to believe you're alone because you deserve it, that you've distanced yourself from others because it's better this way, that no one would understand, so it's better not to even try. And when this sets in, loneliness becomes the norm. You stop seeking help. You stop asking for help, because you've already decided without realizing it that no one can reach you. What no one told me is that this emotional prison doesn't appear all at once. It comes slowly, disguised as independence, strength, and I can handle it. And before you know it, you're locked inside yourself, with the keys scattered among painful memories you don't want to relive. It was at that point that I faced a choice. Either I continued pretending, protecting myself, surviving, or I began searching for something different, something that would free me from this cycle. Write it down. That makes sense to me. It was an ordinary day. One of those days when we don't expect anything, don't feel much, just carry our bodies from one place to another, with that chronic feeling of exhaustion that comes not from sleep, but from the soul. I was sitting on a bench trying to escape my own mind, watching people pass by too quickly, as if their time were on a different rhythm. And then someone sat down next to me, an elderly man, simple clothes, a serene gaze. He didn't say anything for the first few minutes, he just stood there, present. And somehow that silent presence began to break down what my walls had been protecting for so long. I can't explain why, but when he finally spoke, it wasn't a question. It was a statement, the kind that penetrates the defenses we barely realize we've built. He said, "The pain you carry isn't the end of your story. That's all. Simple. No bullshit." But deep inside me, it felt like a revelation, as if he'd seen something even I couldn't see anymore, as if for a moment someone knew the exact weight I was carrying and wouldn't back down from it. That sentence stuck with me, and what came next wasn't a sermon, nor an attempt at repair. It was listening. It was presence. He told me a little about his own pain, about losses he'd experienced, about nights when he'd also wanted to disappear. But there was something different about the way he spoke. It wasn't bitter. It was purposeful, as if everything that had hurt him had transformed into something greater. He didn't offer me ready-made answers, but he extended something rare, a safe place to exist without having to pretend. And that affected me in a way I hadn't expected. That meeting was the first ray of light after so many dark days. Not because it resolved everything, but because it raised a new question. What if there's still something beyond the pain? What if there's a kind of redemption that doesn't erase the past, but transforms its meaning? Those conversations were repeated over the following days, and little by little, I met other people, people with different stories, but similar wounds, each with their own invisible scars, their own silent battles, their own muffled cries. And it was there in that listening space that I began to realize something. I wasn't alone. I never was. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's a point in the journey where we stop looking for an external miracle and start looking within. And that's what happened. I began to realize that before reconnecting with the world, I needed to reconnect with myself. But to do that, I first needed to allow myself to feel the grief, the guilt, the fear, but also the longing, the gratitude, the hope. And it's amazing how the presence of someone who truly listens can open space for all of this. That man, who I later discovered was also a veteran, was, unknowingly, the first step in my transformation. Not because he gave me formulas, but because he reminded me of something essential. You don't need to be cured to be worthy of love. And what's more, you don't need to understand everything to start walking. Sometimes the first step is simply admitting that you don't want to live like this anymore, that you want to change, that you need help, that you truly want to rediscover meaning beyond the pain. And that's when I found myself faced with a new possibility, not just surviving, but living with purpose, using pain as a starting point, not a prison. That changed my mindset. I began to see the past not as a punishment, but as part of the construction of who I could become. And every conversation, every exchange, every sincere embrace that followed showed me how much we need each other, how much battle lies behind the scenes in almost everyone, and how ignoring it isolates us even more. This phase of my journey wasn't made up of grand events. It was made up of small encounters, of silent revelations, of internal decisions that began to forge a new path. And even when the pain still pressed, because yes, it pressed, I no longer faced it alone. And that made all the difference, because there's a kind of healing that arises from connection. And I began to experience that healing there, in that simple exchange of glances, words, and silence. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. I wasn't expecting anything from that day. It was just another cloudy morning, like so many others when the body left the house, but the soul remained. The streets were the same, the noise of cars, the conversations of others, the strange smiles of those who seemed to have every reason in the world to move on. I felt invisible, and in a way, I preferred it that way. The less they noticed me, the less I needed to pretend I was okay. I sat on a park bench just to wait for time to pass. I was in no rush, no direction, just that inner silence, which had become part of my routine. And that's when he appeared. A gentleman with a calm gaze, unshaven, and hands marked by time. He didn't approach in a hurry or with pity. He simply sat on the same bench, at a respectful distance, as if he already knew I couldn't stand any more idle questions. Time passed slowly. His presence was calm, almost silent. I continued to stare into space, trying to ignore it, until he said something so simple and so unexpected that it made me turn away. You don't need to heal now. You just need to know you're not alone. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't want to hear my story and offer advice. He didn't interrupt me with catchphrases or ready-made formulas for overcoming difficulties. He just stood there. He listened. He looked at me as if recognizing someone who's hit rock bottom and come back. And then in a calm voice, like someone speaking to someone long lost, he said, "God is still with you." It wasn't a punchline. It didn't seem scripted. But in that moment, it was as if he'd named a presence I'd forgotten. Something inside stirred. I didn't know what, but something gave. I spent years trying to carry it all alone, as if the pain were part of the burden, as if showing fragility would dishonor those left behind. But that sentence shattered me, because it didn't come from a place of forced religiosity. It came from acknowledged pain, from empathy without judgment, from the gaze of someone who has seen the darkness and still chose to light a candle. And when he spoke of God, it wasn't with imposition, it was with tenderness, like someone holding your hand on the edge of the abyss and saying, "I know, but there's more." It was the first time in a long time that someone spoke of faith without sounding distant, because for me, faith had become a difficult word, a sacred territory that I thought no longer belonged to me. After everything I had seen, experienced, lost, it was hard to believe that God still cared. But hearing it, in that tone, at that moment, made me realize that perhaps I had drifted away, but he never had. And that's where the seed was planted. It didn't sprout that same day, but it remained there, like a point of light that refuses to fade. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what happened next wasn't a visible miracle. It was a process, and the first step was allowing myself to consider that there was still room for the sacred in my life, that perhaps, even with everything I felt, there was still a place for faith. Not a fanciful faith that ignores pain, but a real, hard-earned faith of someone who cries out through tears and still finds the strength to carry on. A faith that acknowledges the brokenness and embraces it, that doesn't demand perfection to begin to restore. That man kept finding me, sometimes with a word, other times just with his presence. And it was in that simplicity that I began to experience something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not a peace that nullified my traumas, but one that gave them space to exist without engulfing me. A peace that came from acceptance, from listening, from the certainty that I could be whole even with cracks. I began to understand that true faith doesn't deny pain. It walks with it, side by side, until the weight becomes lighter. These encounters changed my mindset. They made me reflect on the decisions I'd been making since my return. Decisions based on fear, isolation, and self-abandonment. And little by little, I felt a genuine desire to try something new, to break out of that invisible prison I'd built myself. The process wasn't linear. There were days of silence, anger, and doubt. But every conversation with that man was like a reminder, you're still alive, And if you're alive, you can still start over. And then, without realizing it, something inside me began to change. A feeling I no longer knew how to name began to blossom. Hope. It didn't scream. It didn't push. It only appeared occasionally in a simple gesture, a forgotten verse, a fond memory that no longer hurt as much. It was like relearning to breathe, relearning to see beauty, relearning to allow myself, and as unlikely as it seemed, there I was, opening my heart, truly afraid, because if there was a chance of finding meaning, I wanted to try. Comment here. That makes sense to me. It wasn't a turning point. It didn't happen overnight. The restoration began silently, in the interval between one pain and the next, when there was nothing left to prove and no role to play. I had spent so much time trying to appear strong, trying to maintain the pose of someone carrying the world on their shoulders, that when I finally let my guard down, only fatigue remained. An existential fatigue, one that couldn't be resolved with physical rest. It was as if I had to relearn how to exist, and perhaps this was the first step of faith without me even realizing it. At first, my faith was weak, insecure, suspicious. I couldn't pray without feeling hypocritical. But one day, between dawn and dawn, I looked up at the ceiling of my dark room and whispered, "If the Lord is still there, I don't know where to begin." And I heard no answer. No light came through the window, no voice from heaven, but something inside me stirred. It wasn't relief nor euphoria. It was just a presence, a different kind of silence, a safe space. And in that moment, I understood. God doesn't need to answer loudly to be near. Little by little, I discovered I wasn't alone. There were others like me, broken but alive, men and women who had also weathered internal storms, who also carried their invisible scars. And it was by listening to these people that I began to realize something important. Shared pain doesn't diminish, but it ceases to be lonely. In small gatherings, real conversations, moments of vulnerability, I began to realize there was something sacred in this communion. It wasn't about religion, it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about humanity, about the soul, about being alive, even with the cracks. I started attending meetings, not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. Sometimes I just sat in the back, listened, and left. Other times I found the courage to say a sentence, a piece of the story, and surprisingly, no one tried to fix me. No one interrupted me with formulas or haste. They just listened, and this simple gesture gave me the space to keep coming back, because there, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. Not because I was whole, but because we were all trying to be, each in our own time. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because the restoration wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. And the spirituality that was reborn in me didn't come from great miracles. It came from constancy, from small prayers whispered in the dark, from ancient texts that took on new meaning, from simple phrases like, "one day at a time," which once seemed cliché and now felt like maps. And it was through this slow, almost imperceptible practice that I began to feel something rebuilding itself within me. Not a return to my former self, but the birth of something new. My mindset also began to shift. That inner voice that once only knew how to point out mistakes now, little by little, took on a new voice. A voice that said, "You're still a work in progress." This changed the way I looked at myself, and also how I began to look at others. I stopped expecting people to understand everything. I began to value those who simply stayed, because in pain, presence is worth more than explanations. And that's how I began to connect with people who walked with faith, even without guarantees. People who also had their doubts but didn't give up on believing. Faith, in fact, stopped being theory. It became practice. Sometimes it was just taking a deep breath and repeating to myself, "It's not over yet." Other times it was crying in the middle of a song, playing something I couldn't even name. And when someone said, "I'm praying for you," it no longer felt strange. It felt like a hug. And when I myself began to pray for others, shyly, hesitantly, with trembling hands, something different began to blossom. A peace that didn't require explanations, a strength that didn't demand perfection, just presence. All of this shaped my journey. Not like someone following a straight line, but like someone building little by little with fragile but real bricks. I began to reclaim parts of myself that I thought had died. The joy of laughing without guilt, the ability to be moved without hiding, the pleasure of being with someone without having to pretend. And the more I allowed this internal restoration, the more I realized that the past was still there, but it no longer defined everything. It was part of it, yes, but now it shared space with new memories, with new meanings. It was in this process that I understood something profound. Faith is not the absence of pain. It's the decision to move forward despite it. And this decision needs to be nurtured every day, not with brute force, but with gentleness, with truth, with surrender. And that requires courage. A lot of it, because there are no guarantees. Only the certainty that, with each step, even the most fragile, you are not alone. Communing with other broken lives showed me this. It taught me that the light doesn't need to be intense all the time. It just needs to be there. And that in the end, even if everything still hurts, there is something greater sustaining those who decide to continue. Comment here. I'm on this journey too. In the war I lost soldiers. Here, I gained brothers. And together, we began to fight for something different. It was strange at first, meeting people who reminded me of myself in parts I'd already buried. Men with weary eyes, women with deep scars in the silence of their souls, people who'd been through the chaos and returned with the pieces in their hands, trying to figure out how to put it all back together. The difference was that now we weren't trying to put this together alone. There was a new unity, a new front, not against an external enemy, but against everything that still wanted to keep us paralyzed inside. These brothers didn't wear uniforms, but they carried a different kind of courage. The courage to open their hearts, to tell the truth without embellishment, to admit it still hurt, and still carry on. They didn't demand answers from me, nor did they see me as someone in need of repair. They saw me as someone in need of space, time, truth. And it was with them that I began to understand that the mission had changed. The battle was now different, to make all this pain have a purpose, to make the faith that reached me also a shelter for those still in the dark. We met in cafes, in churches, in simple rooms with chairs arranged in circles. It wasn't anything grand, but each encounter was a safe haven. The conversation flowed, sometimes light, sometimes heavy, but always sincere. Each person carried their own baggage, their own ghosts, their own small victories. And there was something profoundly powerful in realizing that pain, when embraced in a group, doesn't suffocate. It teaches. Vulnerability became a bridge. And in that sharing, I found more healing than in years of silence. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what emerged there wasn't just support. It was identity, a new kind of belonging. I was no longer the guy who returned broken from the war. I was someone rebuilding, and now I had tools, I had people, I had direction, and this new mission began to become clear. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the other, about the next person who still thinks there's no way out, about what's still trapped in fear, guilt, and frozen memory. The hidden truth is that pain prepares us to embrace, and when you understand this, your story takes on new meaning. It was with these brothers and sisters in faith that I began to revisit internal places I'd avoided, and it was with them that I found the strength to return to external places as well. Hospitals, shelters, spaces where the pain is evident, not to show my scar, but to show that it's possible to move forward even with it. We began visiting other veterans, other survivors, other people who were at their limit. Sometimes all we did was listen. Other times we prayed silently, without promising anything but with the hope that God would do something, as He had done for me. The impact was real, not because we had perfect organization or a massive structure, but because we carried the truth, and truth, when shared with love, transforms. It's as if each visit, each conversation, each glance, gave us back a piece of what the war took, not only for those on the receiving end, but for us as well. It was as if the mission of service kept us alive, and more than alive, whole. This journey brought revelations I never would have achieved alone. I discovered that there is strength in exposed fragility, that there is beauty in embraced pain, and that, even behind the scenes of the most difficult stories, there is room to begin again. These brothers, some ex-combatants, others merely survivors of invisible battles, became part of who I am today. And with them, I learned that fighting isn't just about resisting. It's about loving. It's about reaching out. It's about caring, even when you're still bleeding inside. And perhaps the greatest miracle of all was this, realizing that by helping others rise, I was rising too. That each compassionate word was like a brick rebuilding my inner house. That each sincere prayer was like a breath of life into something that seemed dead. And so between falls and new beginnings, I began to understand that the purpose is not to forget what happened, but to use it to build something new. Comment here. That makes sense to me. I never imagined that the pain that nearly silenced me would be precisely what makes me speak today. At first, everything seemed too contradictory. How could someone broken help rebuild another life? How could someone who had almost given up so many times become a support for those who were falling? But over time, I began to understand that what hurt me didn't have to be the end of the line. It could be the beginning of a new path, a path where the pain wouldn't be forgotten, but transformed. And that's exactly what began to happen, little by little, quietly, but powerfully. The turning point wasn't a magical moment nor a grand revelation. It was the accumulation of small steps of conscious decisions to stop being silent, to step out of the shadows where I'd been hiding. I began sharing my story, first with fear, then with greater confidence. I wrote down some things I'd kept hidden for years, and I saw people connecting with me. I began visiting places where I knew other veterans were fighting their own internal battles. And I understood, with a clarity that only comes after much pain, that my suffering had not been in vain. Today, I speak. Because if one life is saved like mine was, it was worth coming back. I don't speak as someone who has all the answers. I speak as someone who once sat at the bottom of a well and found a rope extended by hands that asked nothing in return. I speak because I know there are still people down there, trying to understand if it's worth climbing. And if my words can serve as a sign, as a breath of fresh air, as a glimmer of hope, then let them be. Because no new beginning is small when it's born amidst chaos. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because there's something no one tells you about transformation. It hurts. It demands that you let go of old versions of yourself, that you face the dark places head on, that you deal with the memories, the voids, the unanswered whys. But it also brings something no escape can offer: purpose. And this purpose isn't born from achieved perfection, but from honest surrender. The mission today isn't to appear strong, it's to be true. It's to reach out with your scars exposed, unafraid to say, I've been there too. This new mission has taken me to unexpected places, sometimes a room full of people, sometimes a silent cafe with someone who can barely begin to speak. I've stood before young people who've never seen war from the outside, but live internal struggles every day. I've seen tears stream down faces that always smiled in public. And in each of these conversations, something is renewed within me, because every story I hear reminds me of my own, and it confirms to me once again that everything that once seemed meaningless now has direction. The hidden truth I discovered is that our greatest impact comes not from our strength but from our surrender, from our willingness to share our journey without pretense. I'm not the hero of my story, nor do I intend to be. What transformed me was the grace of being embraced by others and one day, having the courage to do the same. It was understanding that my pain didn't need to be buried. It could be a tool. And when that shift happens, life doesn't go back to the way it was before. It becomes something new, something deeper, more truthful. Writing also became part of the mission, not because I dreamed of being an author, but because I needed to organize what was inside. Putting it on paper was like building a bridge between what I'd experienced and what I needed to understand. And when I realized that these words touched other hearts, I understood that my silence had also been overcome. Each written sentence is a piece of shared healing. It's as if pain takes on a new form, no longer as a prison, but as a message. And whoever reads it, whoever sees themselves in those lines, understands that they too can begin writing a new chapter. The lecture, the text, the conversation, all of this became an extension of a choice: to use pain to build, not to hide. It's not easy. There are days when it still presses, when the past tries to shout louder than the present. But now I know how to respond. I know I have something to lean on. I know I'm not alone. And knowing this is what keeps me going. Because ultimately, when we find purpose in what almost destroyed us, something shifts within us. And even if the outside world doesn't notice, we know this was the true victory. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. There was a time when I believed there was no going back, that the pain I carried was too great to understand, too deep to reach. I walked around like someone breathing only out of obligation, with a distant look in my eyes, my chest tight inside. And perhaps what hurt most wasn't what happened in the war, but the constant feeling that no one could truly reach me out here, the feeling that everyone was moving on except me. that I had become trapped in time, at a point no one else could see. But over time, through sincere encounters, true listening, and a small but persistent faith, I discovered something that changed everything. I wasn't alone, and I never had been. Pain, when shared with those who've also hit rock bottom, becomes a bridge. Weakness, when embraced, becomes strength. And history, even full of falls and silences, can become a path for someone still lost. What was once an open wound has become a scar, and a scar, unlike raw pain, carries the mark of survival. It tells us that something happened, but also that it's over, that you didn't stop there. This journey taught me that internal battles are not signs of weakness but marks of our humanity, that there's no shame in crying out for help, in confessing exhaustion, in admitting that the weight has become unbearable, because only those who have the courage to be real are capable of finding true healing, and, more than that, are capable of offering healing to others. That's how it was for me. I didn't find ready-made answers, but I found willing people, and with them I became a better person, someone with purpose, someone with compassion, someone constantly rebuilding, but whole enough to move forward. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because what I've learned throughout this process is that there are many ways to fight, and some of them are silent. Fighting can mean continuing to wake up even when you don't feel like it. It can mean opening your heart to someone even when you're afraid of getting hurt. It can mean bending your knees when everything seems to be falling apart. It can mean writing a sentence, giving a hug, staying silent, and simply being present. Fighting sometimes is just not giving up, trying again. And every time we choose to keep going, even in pain, we open a door for something new to enter. And if you've made it this far, if something inside you has been stirred by this story, I want to remind you of something very simple, but perhaps one you need to hear right now. You are not alone. Even if the world seems deaf, even if loneliness screams too loudly, even if everything has lost its color, you are still here. There is still breath in you, and where there is life, there is hope. You are more than the mistakes you've made, more than the pain you've suffered, more than the scars you carry. You are part of something bigger, of a story that is still being written. And, believe me, what comes next can be lighter, more true, more meaningful. If you feel like you're powerless, remember, even in war, there is hope. And here, you'll never fight alone. Comment here. That makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, I can only say one thing. Thank you. Thank you for staying, for listening with your heart, for walking with me to the end of this story. Nothing I shared was about perfection. It was about process, about truth, about finding meaning even in places where there seemed to be no more light. And if at any point in this video you felt touched, understood, or simply less alone, then every word was worth it. If this content resonated with you, if it spoke to some part of you, subscribe to the channel, because this journey doesn't end here. And I want to continue building this space with those who understand that scars also tell stories that deserve to be heard. And if you want to show me you were with me until the end, write in the comments, "I'm with you until the end." It will be good to read you there. Oh, and if this video resonated with you in any way, please leave a like. This helps us keep this connection alive and bring this conversation to those who also need to hear it. And look, there's a video right here that complements everything we talked about today. Click on it and stay with me there. The journey continues.